What recording my audiobook taught me 1 year later. It's been a year since my audiobook came out, and I've been thinking about the process of recording it. So at the time, it mostly just felt hard, but looking back, a few things stand out much more clearly now. First, the biggest surprise was that recording the audiobook was harder than writing the book. Going into recording the audiobook, I thought, hey, the hard part is done. I have the content. I just have to read it out loud. No. I needed to perform it. Writing is quiet and internal. You can stop, edit, rethink a sentence, walk away, come back. Recording it is none of that. You're on the entire time. You're managing your voice, your energy, your pacing, and your environment all at once. I also needed to listen to my recordings a lot. Do you know anyone who likes hearing their own voice? Every time I started a chapter, I knew I would dislike the first few minutes. There's something about hearing your own voice that takes a second to get used to. I had to acclimate every single time before I could even focus on what I was saying. It reminded me a lot of public speaking. I record my talks so I can watch them later and improve. But watching is always awkward. So before I can find the value in the review, I need to get used to seeing myself and only criticizing myself constructively. Then there was the environment. Writing doesn't care if there's background noise. I wrote my book primarily with Alan Gogol, instrumental music in the background. Recording needs silence. Suddenly, every sound mattered. I moved my wind chimes to the garage to avoid ruining the takes, and I became ultra aware of airplanes overhead. Since when are there so many planes? There's also a low-level panic running in the background the whole time. Did I hit record? Am I sitting in the same spot so the audio matches? Did I plug in the microphone? Did something just mess up that take? It's a very different kind of effort than writing. Even though it's the same content, yes, the book took longer to write than to record, but the work of writing was stress reducing. Recording an audiobook is just stacking stress on stress. Another thing that really stood out was how not solo the process was, even though it feels like it should be. So 2, recording an audiobook isn't solo. An audiobook sounds like the most individual version of a project. It's your voice, your words, your story. But there were so many people involved in making it what it is. First, I did a course through my publisher on the whole process. My fellow author friends and I plotted how to mark up our manuscripts with narration notes best, learning how to highlight where breaths would go, and sharing how we were tackling the process. Next was voice coaching. The voice coaching didn't just help with audiobook narration, but also with my speaking in general. I learned the important step of warming up your voice, then the recordings began. My producer listened to every chapter and flagged issues. A sound engineer edited everything and worked from a marked up copy of my manuscript where I highlighted retakes for extra attention. Beta listeners helped me figure out what actually needed fixing versus what was just me being overly critical. For instance, I learned that I've been pronouncing inundate incorrectly for years. I was emphasizing the wrong syllable. The whole process was another reminder of something I've seen over and over again. Even when something looks like a solo effort, it rarely is. The process was also especially mentally taxing because, unlike most things, there isn't room for iteration. An audiobook is final. Most of my career has been built on the idea that nothing is really ever final. At my yearbook, Meet Me in the Meet group, we were always testing, tweaking, rolling things out slowly, or rolling them back. Even the biggest decision had some flexibility built in. You could adjust after the fact. The audiobook didn't work like that. There was a deadline for re-records and a practical limit on how many you should do. You don't want your audiobook to sound like a Frankenstein monster of clipped together sentences. My producer limited me to 10. Even after multiple rounds of editing, proofreading, and reading the entire book out loud 8 times and listening to the raw recordings 3 times, you can always find something to change. A year later, that's probably the biggest lesson that stuck with me. Not every change is an improvement. Sometimes it's just continuing to tinker because you can. Having a cap on re-records forced me to be more thoughtful about what actually mattered. I relied a lot on the beta listeners' feedback to guide that. What would a listener notice? What would actually make a difference versus what I just felt was imperfect to me? That constraint was uncomfortable at the time, but it was also useful. Without it, I could have kept going. It also made me realize how rare true finality is in most work. We tend to treat decisions as if they are permanent, as if getting them wrong is a big deal, but most of the time, they're not. You can adjust most projects and revisit decisions. We just don't typically recognize the flexibility in the moment. The audiobook was one of the few things I've worked on where that wasn't true. You record it, you submit it, and that's it. No edits, no updates, no second version. It's just done. Final. At the time, that felt pretty terrifying. Now, a year later, I appreciate it more. It forced me to finish something without over-optimizing it, to let it stand as it was, and to move on to the next thing, which, in the end, is the whole point.